just to kind of maybe crudely summarize what's happening in Iran, if I can, it's like this is a country that was shaped, at least in recent times, by, of course, a revolution, but also a brutal 8-year war with Iraq, with confrontations with the United States, and resistance to Israel in a lot of ways, and like all of those events in recent times, just in the last 50 years, let's say, have been prefaced to this moment where a lot of the fears of the Islamic Republic are being realized. So, foreign interference, loss of sovereignty, chaos, disintegration. As early as 2019, Donald Trump said that, a war with the United States would be the quote, official end of Iran. And so, can you speak to how, I suppose, the leadership, but also importantly, like the population of Iran is looking at this current war as truly an existential crisis? And how, for you, like these different threads of history kind of converge in this really critical moment?
Yeah, I mean, Iran is not a homogenic society, so there are a lot of different opinions, of course. If if we just look to the past 20 years, we had so many different waves of uprising where people actually demanded, better wage, better working conditions, another family law, the right to choose what you wear. So in all these waves, you had both demands that are economic, because this is also a highly corrupted system that have been since 30 years enriching itself, and not the people of Iran. And on the other hand, you have the political uh, demands. You want freedom, you want to be able to vote freely, to decide your own leaders. And so what we saw in December, January happening was only one of these, like these, a part of this wave of protest. And even though we know Mossad was on the ground, we know that the US have been threatening Iran with war ever since the invasion of Iraq. Still, the people have said that they want a regime change. And when the attack happened this summer, it was very interestingly to see that, the writers union, intellectuals, the political prisoners, they actually said, we don't want war, we don't want a regime. They were very clear on that. Even people in Evin prison wrote statements that were saying no to Islamic Republic, no to foreign intervention. This time around, I think it's a bit difficult to uh, to understand what the people of Iran are thinking, because the brutality from the regime in December and January was really hard. And this is nothing new, because during 47 years, the Islamic Republic has always met protest with hard repression. That is the only way they know how to do it. They never try to meet, the protesters, not the unionists, not the feminists, not the reformists. So repression has been their only language towards protests. But when it was so brutal this time, I think a lot of people in Iran felt, okay, we cannot do it anymore. We need some help from outside. That is one part of the society. Then we also actually have another part of the society. We don't know how big it is. Some people say 10%, 15%, 20% that actually supports the Islamic Republic. And they were the ones coming out now mourning Khamenei. Many of them are, of course, on the payroll of the regime, so maybe they feel they have to. But there is actually a segment in the Iranian society that wants this regime to survive. And I think then we have a lot of people in between, like the ones we saw this summer, like the intellectuals in the writers' union, or the political prisoners who have been paying with their freedom. Uh, so it's very difficult to say, because also it's difficult to get in touch with people in Iran. And also during the past 30 years, it's been impossible to organize and mobilize something that will hold, because every time we saw a movement wake up, people have been imprisoned, people have been killed, people have, not being able to mobilize. So when I was in Iran the last time, 2004, and met a lot of people who were trying to unionize, this was a new awakening for the labor movement, and it's important to remember that the workers' movement's history in the Iranian Revolution, 1979, because it was actually the revolutionary process went on for almost a year, and it was actually when the workers went in with the full strength that and stopped the country in a general strike that actually the Shah fell. So the labor movement has an important role in what will happen in Iran. So in 2003, 2004, they tried to reorganize. And first it was secretly they met in the mountains, they met comrades' houses. But then when they went out, and between 2004 and 2005, 6, when they were actually visible in society, when they were saying that we have the demands to actually get paid, we've been working for 8 months and didn't get paid, or the bus drivers that said we want better conditions. So what the regime did was to decapitate the movement by taking their leaders and totally silencing them. After that, we had the feminist movement. They tried even the reformist way. They didn't try to make a revolution. They tried to change the law, the family law, by signatures from 1 million women. And that movement was also decapitated because their leaders fled or they were arrested, and so forth and so on. So when you don't have the possibility to mobilize, to build something that lasts, it's also very difficult when it comes to these big uprisings to actually do something revolutionary with it. Because if you just have 2 months of riots or of demonstrations that we saw in December, January, or Women Life Freedom movement in 2022, they are big uprisings. You can see a lot of Iranians going out in the streets, and the Women Life Freedom movement was very special in that you saw all the minorities participate in this uprising. But then, of course, because they don't have an organization and the possibility to mobilize more than these, big protests, the regime can just, kill it. And with
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
not that any of these movements didn't have an impact of the Iranian society. Of
of
course they
course.
did.
Yeah, yeah,
But they couldn't. The power relations were never in their favor.
yeah. I can sort of see that. And I was reading Afshin Matin Asghari's book Axis of Empire, which says like basically 2/3 of Iranians think that U.S. relations, for example, is the way he frames it, should be based on like democracy and human rights. And nearly all Iranians oppose U.S. military intervention. But as you rightly point out, I mean, this is not a homogeneous society. This is a society in which, there have been competing power interests kind of putting pressure on the economy and culture. But it's interesting that you point to the sort of decapitated labor movement and leftist movements in Iran, because it does feel as though gains have been made in spite of the brutal repression, and that even Iran's leadership has been forced to, in some ways, appeal to those movements. Right? Like I was, kind of amazed to read about Iran's Vision 2025, which is this kind of like progressive document that aims for industrialization and economic growth and cultural and educational advancement, building a modern Islamic state in Iran. I mean, Khamenei was quoted as saying like he wanted progress, development, and justice in that country. So it was clear like those movements gained some traction, and yet the United States, from George W. Bush on, has largely, it feels like, been interested only in exploiting that kind of left populist wave for the purpose of, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but a kind of, it feels like American imperialism.
Of
Um,
course.
can you maybe give us context on that element of, U.S. tactics for basically destroying Iran and its attempts to kind of undermine those movements as well and exploit them?
Yeah, I mean, ever since 2003, people or activists in Iran have been saying that the regime is using the threats and the sanctions against us as movements. So whenever we go out, we are arrested and then accused of being spies for Israel or the US. And like the repression from the Islamic Republic apart, this these conditions made it, of course, very difficult to organize and mobilize, because every time you said we want better working conditions or we want an equal family law, then the regime can just say you're the American spy, and that really shuts down mobilization in a society, because Iranians are, we have a long history. If you look to the modern Iranian history, we have a long history of organizing and mobilizing and actually wanting, to have our rights and our freedoms. You can see it from the constitutional revolution in 1905 until today. And also because of the promises of the revolution 1979 were never implemented by the Islamic Republic, people keep going out like every second, every third year. That is still in the memory, that the revolution 79 said we want a free Iran, free from dictatorship, free from imperialists, and also where people can live and eat and have schools and healthcare. Um, so what the US has been doing since 2003 is actually killing any or help to kill any mobilization and organization in Iran. With that said, it's still, the Islamic Republic that is doing so by imprisoning people or killing protesters, or just make people disappear. A unionist just disappears, and then people know, okay, that will happen to me next time, so they shut up. So I don't think the US has any interest of the Iranian people. Of course, the US and Israel is doing this because they have their own interest. And when or if the Islamic Republic falls, if they put their own puppet there, or if there would be a civil war between different minorities, then for the first time in history we have the total dominance of the empire in the Middle East. And that is very scary because who is actually killing most of the people in the Middle East? Of course, the Islamic Republic, they are killing their own. And other regimes have been killing their own, like the previous Syrian regime. But if you really count it, US and Israel are the powers who killed more people in the Middle East for the past, I don't know, 50 years. So this is a really dangerous moment, I think, that we are seeing in front of us, because I don't think that the people of the Middle East will gain anything by this total hegemony of the empire.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, like, we're talking about numbers killed, which is so obviously incredibly grim to, almost like just reduce it to numbers killed. But it matters when it feels like part of the justification for this intervention is rooted in the number cited killed by the Islamic Republic, which is the number that's been floating around regarding this recent crackdown is something like 30,000 people, right? And there are conflicting reports about the scale of the violence and the repression. But according to Reuters and other services, the number is much much lower. So there does seem to be this kind of propaganda campaign designed around just inflating that number in order to describe this regime as fundamentally evil. When, as you point out, if we wanted to point to examples of evil genocidal slaughter, I mean, the numbers killed in the Gaza genocide are unfathomable. The number of people that were killed or died as a result of the United States intervention in Iraq is astronomical. And so we do need to think about here, I think, yeah, the scale of the violence depending on which hegemon is in control, as you say. But you've mentioned Israel a few times, and I wanted to kind of unpack the role that is the key role that Israel has right now, as the kind of tail that wags the dog, bringing the United States into this conflict. In Axis of Empire, um, Martin Esgari points out that there have been a number of recent efforts to restore diplomatic relationships, actually, between the United States and Iran, despite a history of tension and conquest and basically humiliation. Um, each one has been sabotaged deliberately by Israel. And I kind of wanted to ask why. It has actively scuttled multiple efforts to constrain even Iran's nuclear program, seemingly as justification for continued militarism. I can't wrap my head around this fact that it seems as though Israel has been invested in actually fracturing relationships between Iran and the West.
Yeah, I actually think that is about the hegemony because
Right.
even in the war 1973, the and 1973 in that year the Shah ruled Iran, so Iran was an ally to both Israel and the US. But even then, the Saudis and the Emiratis, they stopped oil deliveries to Israel and the US. So so even then there were not this hegemony of Israel in the region. So Iran is really the last, I don't know what you want to call it, the last axis of resistance, as they call it themselves, or the last enemy of Israel, because they kind of made peace and normalization with all the other countries in the region. Uh, so that is why they really don't want the Islamic Republic to survive. And they don't want to risk, of course, any new leadership that would come out of a new Iranian revolution that maybe would not be as friendly to Israel as the Shah was, because they actually don't know what the people of Iran wants, and they kind of suspect that a revolution that comes out from the masses of the Iranian people may be an Iran that also objects Israel's apartheid or Israel's occupation or Israel's genocidal policies. So so this is why they try to destroy it, because they don't believe in having an intact leadership in Iran. They just want chaos in Iran. I think they're arming the Kurds and the Baluchi, and so for Israel, the best scenario is just total chaos in Iran and Balkanization of the country that has actually been one country for so many centuries now. And even though Netanyahu has been lifting up the son of the last Shah, the Reza Pahlavi, and a lot of Israelis are helping him in social media, and Haaretz wrote about this some months ago. Even though they're promoting him as a leader, I think they are understanding that Trump is not especially interested in putting him in place. So that's why they're doing chaos. But also you need to remember Israel as a state, they need war. They need war to survive. If they don't have their own genocide, like if we look before 23, before 7th of October, every second or third year, Israel has been attacking some neighboring countries, mostly Palestinians, of course, but also other neighboring countries with war. So without war, Israel cannot survive as the Zionist entity that they are at the moment. And right now they have a leader in the US that is really, really friendly with them. So I think they're kind of just taking these opportunities to make chaos in the region so that they can have the full hegemony. But I also, sorry, I wanted to come back to the empire and Iran, because it's a very interesting history in the modern history of Iran. As soon as people rose up, if it was in the Constitutional Revolution 1905, or it was Mossadegh that wanted to nationalize the oil 1953, and other, smaller events, every time the people of Iran rise up, the empire comes and kind of destroys the movement by silencing it and putting their own puppet in place. The only parenthesis in this period of modern history of Iran is the revolution 1979, where both the Islamists and the leftists said no to external intervention, and the empire cannot endure this, Almost 50 years later, they're obsessed with the Iranians, this time saying no. And when I talk about the empire, previously it was the British, it was the Russians, it was the US. Uh, so it's kind of also, the dream to have Iran, this big country in the Middle East, under their control, because they also know what happens in Iran will affect the whole region.
I feel like it maybe makes sense for us to, talk about Iran's support for Hamas in resisting this, genocidal campaign of retribution since October 7th. I mean, this, and you're right, of course, that like this is a window that Israel sees as really important. Makdisi just made this point that like Israel is positioning itself for an era after total support from the United States is over by really exploiting it as much as possible right now, and for reasons that you just outlined. But Iran has aided Hamas since October 7th, especially, and Iran, it's clear, kind of saw this as part of a bigger global resistance movement. Um, can you talk about that kind of network of resistance as it currently operates? Like how is that motivated, as you say, by a kind of anti-imperial or anti-colonial sentiment or spirit? And how do we remember and recount that history so that the world actually understands what's at stake here and doesn't reduce it to this Islamophobic and Orientalist language of evil?
I just want to be clear that I'm an exiled Iranian that cannot go back to my home country because I wrote a lot about this regime.
Mm,
So,
mm-hmm,
so
mm-hmm.
this regime for me is also evil. Like
Right,
I really would like to see a free Iran, an equal Iran, an Iran where also me personally can go back
right.
and show Iran to my kids. And by saying no to a war on Iran is not saying yes to the Islamic Republic.
Mm-hmm,
I just want
mm-hmm.
to be clear with that because the
Sure.
Iranian diaspora is a very aggressive force
Yeah.
that will put your words here and there and just
And aided by in many ways American, propaganda and right-wing
yeah, of
media,
course.
right? Like, yeah,
Yeah, and also Israeli. So
sure.
yeah, but I'm a person who has long been engaged in the Palestine movement, but also in the movement for a free Iran. So I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
can hold two thoughts in my head at the same time,
Right.
and so I think one of the reasons that Iran has been aiding Hamas or mostly maybe Islamic Jihad in Palestine is because since after the invasion of Iraq, Iran saw an opportunity to actually export, their ideology to not confine themselves to their own borders, and also the Islamic Republic started to have uh, imperial ambitions, with Syria, with Lebanon, with Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Palestine. So that is also a geopolitical play, of course, where you also have this big Sunni country, Saudi, just next door, that has been, a U.S. ally for so many years, and you cannot count on them as the Islamic Republic. I'm saying they cannot count on the Saudis if there would be under pressure from the US, for example, right now. And also, Iran is a country where it's totally encircled by US military bases. So this has also been their way to try to, keep their own sovereignty, but by having proxies in the region. Like how do you survive when you're surrounded with so many American military bases? Yeah, that's also to have people in Iraq that will uh, do some of your dirty work, or Syria, or in Palestine. But I mean, it's also interesting to see after 7th of October if the Islamic Republic really was this anti-Israeli, anti-imperialist force, they would have done something on 8th of October. So in my view, uh, it's a lot of strategic plays for the Islamic Republic for themselves, but the rhetoric that they are doing this for the Palestinian people, that they are doing this for Palestinian liberation, I don't believe that. Because they could have done something earlier. If Hezbollah, and because Hezbollah is under the Islamic Republic and they do whatever they say, if they really wanted to stop the genocide, they had different chances during these past 2 years. But they didn't act on the behalf of the Palestinian people and their liberty. So they acted only for their own interest, of course. So it's difficult to say. I mean, of course, that Hamas wouldn't have been able to do 7th of October if it wasn't aided by the Islamic Republic, if they wouldn't have organized themselves during the year that Morsi was in power in Egypt. Uh, but I really don't think I think the Islamic Republic rhetoric about the liberation of Palestine has been more rhetoric than actual doings.
Wow, that's really, incredibly powerful to kind of, recalibrate the sometimes very sort of stark binaristic understanding that folks have of struggle in the region, right? Like, and it also, helps me just, reevaluate some of the assumptions that I had around the reasons for Iran launching these attacks against, other Gulf states because, you know, the the interviews, the discussions, things I've been reading have been suggesting that the goal is very strategic in terms of like making energy prices more volatile, using economic pain as a weapon of like asymmetrical warfare, and that part of the long term goal is to pull these other states into a conflict so that it's not just Iran versus the United States and Israel, but all of that sort of imagines, I suppose, the Islamic Republic, acting, not just in its own interests, but also as a means of like preserving sovereignty for its people and so on. And I guess like what I'm saying is like my assumption in some ways was that this is a government that ultimately is altruistic and so on. And what you're saying is like that's simply not the case. That these strategic decisions are about self-preservation and preservation for the of the elite. But at the same time, I'm wondering if you can talk about the grand strategy, as Vali Nasser has put it, of the Islamic Republic, which is for him entirely about exhaustion, trying to exhaust imperial powers through this kind of war of attrition. And what that says about, I suppose, the leadership, the current leadership in Iran, that, they don't perhaps necessarily see this war of attrition as something that they need to mitigate against because they're not directly supporting their own people. They're largely supporting their own power.
No, I mean, some of what you're saying is also true. Like to exhaust the
Mm,
the oil economy
mm,
to because they don't have the same military power, of course, as the US or the Israelis. So some of it's true, but if even if you look at the Iranian society in itself, um, how should I put this? Okay, so after the 12-day war, the Iranian leadership, they had a chance to reconcile with their population. Uh, it's been decades of droughts in Iran. We had so many different environmental catastrophes. We had the the sanctions that really made life harder for normal Iranian people. And we had all this dictatorship that didn't let people to dress as they want or speak as they want or unionize or whatever. Uh, After 12-day war, the Islamic Republic could have gone another way. They could have said, okay, we will meet you in some of your demands. But but then you kind of don't understand that for the past 30 years, the it- the leadership of the Islamic Republic has been enriching themselves. So in our book, we call them the millionaire mullahs because they have been, taking over factories, selling lands, and doing a lot of stuff that made the class society in Iran really, really divided. So nowadays, you don't even have a middle class that can actually buy eggs and breads for their children. Uh, and at the same time, you have a segment that is very well educated and they know their rights. They remember the promises from the revolution 1979. Uh, but the Islamic Republic were never interested in those 90 million people. So the project the past 30 years has been to just enrich the mullahs and the people that are tied to the regime. And that includes, of course, the Revolutionary Guards. So, of course, they want power in the region because that makes them even more powerful and be them able to stay in power. But I don't see the Islamic Republic, taking the interest of the Iranian people or the Palestinian people into account in the long run. Uh, so you kind of have to see that this is also a bourgeois capitalistic society, and not even the past 20 years maybe doing anything for the infrastructure. You have all these people living in Balochistan in 30 years of drought. You don't build schools, you don't build pipelines of water, you don't build healthcare. You have a capital that runs out of water because you have mismanaged water. Uh, 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 Climate change aside, that it's really affecting Iran hard, but the use of underground water for different factories, for example, in Esfahan, the steel factory and so on, they mismanage the water totally. So for what? To enrich themselves and to enrich the capitalist class in Iran. And then it came to a point where the capital didn't have water and the water scarcity was so much. So the president Pezeshkian went out and say we have to move the capital. So I mean, this regime is not thinking about their own and hasn't been doing that for at least the past 30 years.
And the, as you say, like the background here is a worsening climate crisis, which I know you've written about in terms of how destabilization as a result of environmental crises, like drought, leads to this catastrophic wave of climate refugees as the kind of new reality of fossil capital. And so, I mean, like the other aspect of it clearly is that like this is not only a bourgeois capitalist class ruling Iran, but it's also, a class that is ruling a petrostate, which in the current moment is kind of inherently unstable. So you really do have petrostates warring against other petrostates.
Yeah.
And in the middle are the people that you write about and write for and write with, the people who are demanding a kind of grassroots climate revolution, we might call it, that is truly about, opening onto a modern economy.
Both 2017 and 2019, you saw these uprising, and it was a lot about, the price of bread, the drought, and these people that came out to the street back then, they weren't the middle class. They were former farmers who lost their land because of a lot of drought. And the last savings they had, they put in some banks, and then suddenly the banks vanished. So you had all these people losing their land, losing their livestock, losing everything that they had built their life on for generations, and then they even lost the last months they had in the corrupted bank system. So that was really also like a convergence of different crises coming together that made people go out. And at that point, the Islamic Republic could have also done something, but they didn't because really they don't know any other form of language towards their own than repression. So when you have millions of people who cannot use the land anymore because of drought, because of bad water management, and they move into cities and they live under really bad conditions, of course they will rise up. Of course they will, they're fed up. They want to live. Um, so And it's not that the Islamic Republic didn't produce any reformists, because they actually did. And in 2009, we saw that movement, the reformist movement. And what the leadership in Iran did was to put their leaders under house arrest. And they kind of been there since then. So they were really not interested in, meeting the population in any way.
I did want to ask about, the role of, I suppose, the Iranian diaspora of which you are a part. This too is not by any means a homogenic group, um, you know, and one that it seems as though is still a key part of Iran's struggle for sovereignty, for self-definition. There are there are histories to this as well. I mean, like people are asking a lot about Reza Pahlavi, the Shah's son, the MEK, right? Like these are things that I don't think folks have context for, but these are in many ways kind of like Western projects, seen as Western projects. Um, is there any hope for a kind of unification? I mean, it's almost a contradiction in terms, like a unification of this diaspora for the purpose of liberation. Is that a thing that you're sort of like actively a part of? Does that give you any kind of hope, or is it exactly the opposite? I don't know.
Oh, that's a very good and difficult question. You kind of have to understand the Iranian diaspora as a very traumatized diaspora because of what happened in 79. So, so the Revolution 79 was one of modern history's biggest revolution as in terms of the number of population actually participating in the revolution. And uh, Iran had been a society under the rule of Shah, under the rule of his secret police, Savak. And so it was kind of the same situation as now, that it's really difficult of organizing and mobilizing and having, something further than what you're doing here and now. But also it was a different time in the world. Of course, it was the 70s. We had a lot of influence from leftist movements. So the Iranian left was actually quite big in that period of time. And they went in full strength in the revolution. And when Khomeini came to power, they kind of lost that revolution. And the Iranian left was so big, from the Stalinist to the party to smaller Pejak or the Fedayeen minority and so on. And they really fought in the revolution, but then they lost the revolution, and they were scattered all around the world, and very traumatized by this event. So I would say that the Iranian left in the diaspora never actually did manage to reorganize themselves again, because they were caught up in fighting each other. They were caught up with everything going on in Iran, their comrades being executed in prisons and so on. And then we have the Mujahideen, the MEK that you said. They were kind of like leftist Islamist movement, and they were also well organized. But then when they went out to exile, they were caught up also with, their comrades being like a lot of Mujahideens were executed in prisons during the 80s in Iran. But the mistake that they did was to stand on Saddam Hussein's side in the Iran-Iraq war, and they actually turned their weapons towards their own for, on Saddam Hussein's side, and he was the one attacking Iran. So they did that really big mistake, and I think they forever kind of lost any legitimacy for people in Iran because of that move. And also, the left in Iran, they have always, during this past 47 years, held their distance to MEK, to the Mujahideen. And then we have the royalists that fled Iran with a lot of money. And they had their base in Los Angeles in the US. And I think they became kind of a part of the class society in the US because of the wealth that they came to the US with. So for decades and decades, you didn't hear anything from them. Like if we would have Iran demonstrations, you would see, a lot of leftists, a lot of mujahideen, and then you saw maybe 5 or 10 royalists. But then during the Women Life Freedom, I don't know how and why. Maybe because of all these new TV stations that we have in the diaspora that has been running for the past 7, 8 years. Suddenly they were loud and they tried to make the Women Life Freedom movement to their own. But the very special thing with the royalist movement or the people who supports Pahlavi is that they are extremely aggressive in a way that is kind of unknown to the Iranian diaspora before this. I mean, people have fought each other, of course, especially the left, but their aggressiveness is on another level. And I think that, of course, has to do with the history of Savak and the Shah and how he ruled Iran. And it's for me like, how can you wave the flag of the Israelis when you're talking about your people in Iran? How can you say yes to bombs when you know that bombs will, of course, kill a lot of civilians and also totally kill any possibility to organizing something that will go on. Um, so I don't see the diaspora coming together at all, unfortunately, and this is very, very sad, of course. So the only hope is for the people in Iran, and when we have a left in the West or Western media also saying there is we don't have any options in Iran. We don't have a left party in Iran. We don't have a union movement. Yes, maybe not something that we can see, but we actually have a lot of people that have been struggling in Iran, and we have a lot of people in prisons that could come out and kind of be a leader for a movement if that would be, a period of openness where they actually could mobilize. So I think it's very important for us to lift up their voices. For example, during the war this summer, when they actually came out with statements, and also not, because we cannot see them, it doesn't mean that they are not there, and because we cannot see them, it doesn't mean that the youth or these political prisoners are actually able to do something by themselves. So I don't have any hope in the diaspora. I really, really hope that if this regime falls, that the diaspora can hold itself and just listen to people in Iran. When it comes to the Pahlavi people, I don't know. It really frightens me what they could do in Iran, like the damage they could put in place in the Iranian society with their history of repression and being so aggressive. That is really something that scares me.
Yeah, I mean, I think people should share that fear. It's a very real fear of effectively fascism, I think. But your analysis is really, really genuinely helpful for reshaping, like, not just my understanding of the situation, but my own, and I think a lot of people's tendency toward just despair and a kind of fatalism. Like, there is still hope for democracy. There has to be, in some sense, and yet the next few weeks look really terrifying. So I really thank you for this analysis and for kind of giving me a different perspective on what's happening in the country?
It's really difficult to have hope in these days because the bombs are falling and like school children's are getting killed. But just before the bombs, that is where actually my hope was lighted again, because you had the students going out after 40 days of mourning, and you would hear them say stuff like, for one that hundreds are behind you, or women life freedom, or release all the political prisoners, and they kept going out day in and day out, even if they were met by the Basiji police at the universities, the paramilitary force of the Islamic Republic. And they didn't give up. They were going out, and it kind of reminded me of the things that I've read about the Revolution 79, that it started also at universities, and I kind of felt the hope again, like they kept going out even if they were massacred 40 days before that, and revolution is not something that goes from one day to another. It is actually a process, and that process needs to have its time in Iran. So the really sad thing was that the bombs were the thing that silenced the students this time, not the Islamic Republic. So I still have hope in them. We don't know what will happen now in like what country will they have after all these bombings. But these people are obviously still there. These students and the workers and the women movement, they are still in Iran.
Right. Thanks so much. This has been, incredibly eye-opening, and I appreciate you making the time.
Thank you so much for having me.